convoys.
May 11th. Convoy W8 is under heavy attack to our north. They lost 6 ships last night. May 13. Large convoy ahead of us being escorted by the United States Navy is under terrific attack by a swarm of subs. We are detailed to go to their aid.
The presence of U.S. ships with the convoys is dangerous. Both German and American navies are under orders to avoid a sea battle that could lead to open war. The British and Canadian ships do attack the submarines. By the end of May 1941, 33 German U-boats have been sunk. But the Allies have lost 882 ships. For Britain and Churchill, the news is still grim. On May the 10th, London suffers its worst bombing raid. 3,000 people are killed in one night. But in June, the threat of a German invasion is lifted. Hitler's forces turn east and set out to destroy the Soviet Union. Hitler's pact with Stalin is over. His army pushes on through eastern Poland, the Ukraine, and into Russia. Missouri Senator Harry S. Truman.
If we see that Germany is winning, we ought to help Russia. And if Russia is winning, we ought to help Germany. And that way let them kill as many as possible. Though I don't want Hitler to win, under any circumstances.
Roosevelt and Churchill believe any resistance to Hitler will help their own security. They promise all possible aid for Russia, even though the U.S. military believes the Red Army will soon collapse. Within a year, the Germans kill or capture 4.5 million people. The Nazis get within 20 miles of Moscow. But the Red Army fights on. Independence Day, 1941. America is still at peace. Among those joining in the nationwide celebrations are some of the 5,000 British children who have been evacuated to the United States. Jean Stromanger of Ohio is caring for 2 girls from Hampshire. She writes to their parents.
You should have seen Sheila and Dinah standing up singing God Bless America and the Star-Spangled Banner at the top of their lungs. The girls will go into hospital to get their tonsils out this week. Methinks Dinah will go into one of her weeping acts, which are a little unnerving.
John and Grace Matthews to the Stromangers.
We've been puzzling over your description of Dinah's nervousness. I wonder if it's a reaction to the gunfire and general noise of air raids which she experienced before she left. The effect of bombing on young children over here has received a good deal of attention. And it's found they display extreme fear at the most simple things.
That summer, the Atlantic lifeline to Britain is regularly patrolled by the U.S. Navy. In October, the USS Carney is torpedoed off the coast of Iceland. 11 sailors are killed, the first American fatalities of the Second World War.
America has been attacked. The shooting has started, and history has recorded who fired the first shot. In the long run, however, all that will matter is who fired the last shot.
But Roosevelt doesn't ask Congress to declare war, neither then nor 3 days later, when the Germans torpedoed the destroyer, the USS Reuben James, killing another 115 Americans. For 11 months in 1941, bad news from Europe and Asia mixes with good news about the American economy.
Here are the headlines. The Senate has been hard at work speeding America's largest tax bill.
The second year of war, like the first, was a series of British reverses.
Prices during the past month continued to go up.
Berlin claims continued gains in the Ukraine.
President Roosevelt eliminates export of motor fuel and oil to Japan.
We interrupt this broadcast to bring you this important bulletin from the United Press. Flash, Washington. The White House announces Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor.
December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
No color film of the attack on Pearl Harbor has survived. The aftermath was photographed by an American Navy film unit working for Hollywood director John Ford. Army nurse Monica Conter.
I rushed late for duty as we'd had quite a party the night before. I heard some planes real low. I turned to some of the patients who knew aircraft and said, "My God, it's the Japs." They laughed and said, "Don't be silly, it's maneuvers."
Ensign George McCartney Hunter on the USS West Virginia.
Suddenly, the general alarm sounded, and simultaneously, a terrifying explosion rocked the ship. Pearl Harbor was a devastating sight. Forward of the West Virginia, the Oklahoma was bottom up. Astern of us, the Arizona was a mass of flame. High-altitude Jap bombers flew over in perfect formation. They came in waves.
Sailor John Shannon.
The planes passed right overhead with their machine guns going full. There was no mistaking that big red rising sun painted on the wings and tails, nor was there any mistaking the bombs, torpedoes, and machine gun bullets.
Monica Conter.
The sight in our hospital I will never forget. No arms, no legs, intestines hanging out. The hangars all around us were burning, and that awful noise. Then comes the second attack. We all fell face down on the wounded in the hall and heard the bombers directly over us. We had no helmets nor gas masks. It really was a helpless feeling.
The U.S. Pacific Fleet's aircraft carriers are at sea and escape damage. But in less than 2 hours, the attack on Pearl Harbor kills more than 2,400 men and knocks out 8 battleships. 10 hours later, American bases in the Philippines are attacked and 103 aircraft destroyed.
No matter how long it may take us to overcome this premeditated invasion, the American people in their righteous might will win through to absolute victory.
The following day, with one dissenting vote, Congress approves the declaration of war against Japan. 3 days later, Hitler declares war on the United States. Mrs. Ruka Spaeth of Harlingen, Texas, to her son on the USS Shaw in Pearl Harbor.
Dear Johnny, where are you? I received the very nice presents which you sent me from Hawaii for Christmas. How come we haven't heard from you since the 7th? Nobody has heard from you.
Mrs. Spaeth to Naval Headquarters, Pearl Harbor.
We know you are trying hard to locate Johnny, but do you suppose that at any time you could go to the hospital there? It may be that Johnny, during the bombing and explosions, was knocked unconscious or out of his right mind. Anything that you can do to try and find him will be appreciated a great deal by us all.
My dear Mr. and Mrs. Spaeth, I desire to offer you my personal condolence in the death of your son, Johnny Herbert Spaeth. It is hoped that you may find comfort in the thought that he made the supreme sacrifice upholding the highest traditions of the Navy in the defense of his country. Very sincerely yours, Frank Knox, Secretary of the Navy, March 14th, 1942.
Fearing the effect on their tourist trade, American coastal cities, including New York, Miami, and Atlantic City, refused to impose a blackout. In the glow off the Atlantic coast, U-boats sink 8 ships in less than 12 hours. It took 3 months to enforce a blackout along the Atlantic coast. By then, 216 ships have been lost, at a cost of some 3,000 lives. The new well-paid jobs in the defense industry are initially reserved for white Americans. Negroes will be considered only as janitors, declare North American aviation. Threatened in 1941 with the March on Washington by black Americans, Roosevelt issues a landmark executive order instructing employers and unions on federally funded projects to provide jobs without discrimination because of race, creed, or color. A letter to the Pittsburgh Courier from James Thompson.
Is the kind of America I know worth defending? Will America be a true democracy after the war? Will colored Americans still suffer the same indignities that have been heaped upon them in the past?
The letter sparks a massive double V campaign in the African-American press. V for victory over fascism abroad, and victory over racism at home.
The latest news. The Russians have fallen back to unspecified new positions.
The Japanese occupation of Indochina is continuing on schedule.
There's no indication of the German offensive slowing down.
The war news is almost uniformly bad. Hong Kong, Malaya, the Dutch East Indies, and the Philippines are all taken by the Japanese. America needs a success against Japan and practices for it at Eglin Field, Florida. Led by Lieutenant Colonel James H. Doolittle, volunteer crews are training for a daring and dangerous raid. Lieutenant Colonel Doolittle.
The object was to bomb the industrial centers of Japan. It was hoped that the damage done would be both material and psychological.
The crews are trained to fly without visual or radio references. The flight will be outside the normal range of the B-25. Extra fuel tanks are installed, bomb bays modified, and radio equipment removed. The aircraft carriers USS Enterprise and Hornet, leading a task force of 16 ships, set out for a location 500 miles from Tokyo. Nine days out of Pearl Harbor, an action report from the flagship USS Enterprise. Captain George D. Murray.
April 17. Fueling of heavy vessels was undertaken when about 1,000 miles east of Tokyo and was barely completed when the wind increased to gale force. April 18th, the day it was planned to reach the 500-mile circle from Tokyo. Enterprise launched the usual dawn search flight and combat patrol. At 0310, radar disclosed 2 enemy surface craft, and at 0312, a light was seen. There was no doubt now that our force had been detected and almost certainly had been reported.
The 2 Japanese fishing boats that spotted the fleet are sunk. Fearing that their mission might have been compromised, the Doolittle raiders take off a day earlier and 300 miles further from Tokyo than was planned. The 16 B-25 bombers are flying beyond their fuel range. After the raid, they will be forced to land in China or ditch in the sea. Lieutenant Colonel Doolittle.
The Japanese were entirely unprepared for our arrival. Little or no effective camouflage was observed in the Tokyo area. In almost every case, primary targets were bombed.
Remarkably, most of the crews survive and return to duty, but 1 plane crash lands in Japanese-occupied China. 3 of the crew are executed. In reprisals for help given to the American crews, the Japanese kill 250,000 Chinese civilians. The success of the bombing raid lifts American morale, even though, as the military predicted, the actual bomb damage is minimal. Roosevelt is asked from where the planes took off. He smiles and answers, Shangri-La. The Japanese believe the bombers took off from the U.S. base at Midway. They set out to capture the island and destroy the American aircraft carriers in the Pacific. This time, the Americans know when and where the Japanese will attack. They have broken the Japanese naval codes. Navy, Marines, and Army are ready. U.S. Navy pilot, Lieutenant George Gay.
When we finally got into the air on the morning of June the 4th, we had our tactics down cold. We knew our organization and what we should do.
A 108 Japanese planes lead the attack. While filming the battle from gun emplacements, director John Ford gets wounded by shrapnel, but continues filming. Among the Japanese losses are 4 aircraft carriers. America loses 1, the USS Yorktown. Most of Japan's experienced pilots, many veterans of Pearl Harbor, are shot down. It is the decisive sea battle of the Pacific War. It is won in the air. Code-breaking and Navy dive bombers were key to the victory. On the right, Navy pilot, Lieutenant George Gay.
At the time, we felt we were doing a job that wasn't of much importance. Since then, I found out it was, and did a good deal of damage and accomplished its purpose very well.
After Midway, Japan no longer seems invincible. But America's war in the Pacific has barely begun. In Europe and North Africa, Hitler is still triumphant. For all the Allies, winning the war will mean unprecedented effort and sacrifice. The United States is at war again, drawn into battle against Japan and Germany by the attack on Pearl Harbor.
Breakfast in bed before, but you won't have it there anymore.
Americans are not ready for war. Yet the countries of occupied Europe and Asia are looking to the troops of the United States to help secure their freedom. Now, a diverse and sometimes divided nation must build up forces large enough and strong enough to liberate millions. More than 3 million American men are drafted into the armed forces during 1942. Many are unfit for duty. The military improves their lives. Army dentists pull 15 million decaying teeth. Opticians issue 2 million pairs of glasses. 1 million recruits are taught to read and write. Those that can, write home regularly. Harold Clark to his mother.
Dear Blanche, well, I'm in the Army now and definitely behind the 8 ball. I don't like it, and it doesn't like me. So everything is lovely.
Larry Kane writes to his wife Grace in New York from his camp on the American West Coast.
Dearest Gracie, read that address and weep. I couldn't be much farther away from you and still be in the country. The prospects for seeing each other before a long time has elapsed is very slim. Please don't worry about me. All my love, Larry.
At home, the U.S. must overcome racial, social, and class divisions to turn the nation's industrial might towards building weapons of war. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
This production of ours in the United States must be raised far above present levels, even though it will mean the dislocation of the lives and occupations of millions of our own people.
The United States not only needs to arm and equip its own troops, it must support its allies, Britain and the Soviet Union, already staggering under the onslaught of Nazi Germany. If America is to succeed, it must mobilize the energy and resources of the nation towards one end, victory. First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt.
At the present time, it is of paramount importance that the women and girls of our country be given training so that they may do their share in the war emergency.
Women and black Americans are about to receive opportunities they have always been denied. Phyllis Johnson, factory worker.
This is my chance for more pay. Gosh, I get sick of sticking around home. Ma and Pa keep treating me like a baby. Now I'll be on my own, and I can send more money home to them, too.
Over the next 3 years, 16 million men will go through basic training. Keith Winston to his wife.
Today we were learning how to use the bayonet and hand grenade. God, can you picture me putting a bayonet through another man? But they tell us over and over again, if we don't, they'll do it to us.
An enthusiastic Lieutenant Gus Fallon to his bartender friend in New York.
Dear Eddie, I love being a paratrooper. I love to raid the enemy, capture an airport, blow up a railroad terminal. I hope to surround a whole German regiment someday with maybe 20 enlisted men loaded with Tommy guns. Your sky-jumping pal, Gus.
Despite the need for able bodies, the military excludes some parts of American society. Homosexuals are unwelcome, but gay men and lesbians join up anyway and often serve with distinction. The military is also reluctant to accept black soldiers. The diary of Secretary of War Henry Stimson.
The Army has adopted rigid requirements for literacy, mainly to keep down the number of colored troops.
The black Americans who do get into the military mostly serve as laborers and never leave the United States. Less than 5% see combat. A soldier writing to the Richmond Afro-American.
We are proud to serve, but we want to serve in a more important capacity. We can and would fight if trained to do so, but as yet we hardly know that a gun or a tank, combat plans, a hand grenade, machine gun look like. We are referred to on this post as that nigger squadron at the end of the field.
Sunday, April 19th. This Sunday has been a day of many developments on many war fronts. In the fighting in the Philippines, outnumbered American and Filipino forces are still resisting the Japanese invaders on the islands of Cebu and Panay.
The war in the Pacific feeds